Hi, I'm Mary Joy, and I'm a consultant nurse for neurocognitive disorders. I'm the founder and CEO of Aim to Get Better. Now, today, for our first dementia podcast, I'm going to talk about things that you really need to change your mind about when you think about neurocognitive conditions or disorders. So, Dr. Alan Power wrote a book called Dementia Beyond Disease. If you haven't read it, I thoroughly recommend it. It will completely change your thinking about dementia. And one of the real aims of Aim to Get Better is that we are passionate about getting a different, more accurate message about dementia out there into the community for people living with dementia, for their carers, for formal carers, for healthcare professionals, and for the general public. Dementia is such a very, very difficult condition for people to be living with, but it's made even more difficult because of the stigma and because of the misunderstanding. And if carers had a better understanding, if people living with dementia could understand what's going on in their brain, if the general public understood dementia or the neurocognitive disorders that come under that umbrella term, dementia, then it would change the outcomes for people. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, it can cause deterioration over time, but it doesn't have to be as awful as we make it because the general public don't understand what's going on. So I'm here to change your mind about dementia, and I'm going to talk about 4 things today that I want you to really take on board. And the first is actually, I've already used the dementia quite a few times, and there are people that call for us to stop using the word dementia and instead use the proper name, which is a neurodegenerative or neurocognitive disorder. So I'll explain what that means in a minute, but where did dementia come from? Well, dementia is a word that was used, it's a Latin word used for hundreds of years, and it means for somebody to be out of their mind. Or it was used for anybody that was showing what we understand now to be mental illness or mental health conditions, anybody that was considered crazy or mad or behaving in ways that other people were frightened of because they didn't understand the behaviours. Word demented was used to describe any of those conditions. So we absolutely should not be using that word now to describe something where we understand exactly what's going on in the brain. So it's a negative label, and it doesn't actually really tell us much because there's between 1 and 200 different neurocognitive disorders that come under that dementia umbrella. So I'm trying to change my terminology. However, it's going to take a long time for people out there to stop using the term dementia. And in the meantime, to be honest, because if I'm trying to use a term that encompasses every single neurocognitive disorder that comes under that umbrella, I couldn't sit here and name 100 conditions in every sentence. So I will still be using that term until we get better umbrella term. And that's what I think we need. But generally, when we're talking about a specific person, rather than they've got dementia, we should be actually talking about the actual condition in the brain that they've got. Because Tom Kitwood, who is a pioneer of our current understanding about dementia and about these conditions, he said that once you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. Because even if people have got the same neurocognitive disorder, their experience is going to be completely different to anybody else's. So we can't make broad judgments about how things are going to be or what somebody's symptoms are going to be. We have to take that person on face value, listen to them, listen to what challenges they're facing today, and react with that as if it's an individual. It's person-centred. So I will be using the term dementia because, like I say, we haven't got at the minute an alternative umbrella term that people know when talking about. But I really want us all to really start questioning the use of that term and working towards finding a different term that we can use. So a neurocognitive condition is one where there is progressively damage to the brain. And depending on where in the brain that damage occurs and what is causing that damage will determine which neurocognitive condition somebody is diagnosed with. So the second thing I want to change your mind about is that people seem to think that neurocognitive conditions or dementia is all about memory loss. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So perhaps one of the most common neurocognitive disorders that we know about is Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's, yes, you get lumps of protein. Well, whether that's causing it or not is under debate now. A lot of scientists are looking at all sorts of other reasons, but there's something going wrong with some of the proteins in the brain. And that causes these lumps or neurofibrillary tangles to occur in the brain. Usually that occurs when we talk about Alzheimer's disease. That occurs in the area of the brain that is to do with language. Alternatively, it might start in the area of the brain to do with language or memory. So it's either language or memory that are the first symptoms of people with Alzheimer's disease. However, there are loads and loads and loads of other neurocognitive disorders where memory loss doesn't come along until a lot later in the disease. For example, frontal lobe dementia affects the frontal lobe here, which is responsible for our behaviours, for our impulsiveness. It's responsible for our personality, our emotional expression, our ability to empathise with other people. So perhaps a difficulty in understanding how my behaviour might impact on you and feeling empathy or feeling like perhaps I shouldn't have done that. So that frontal lobe is really our whole personality, our whole expression, emotional expression, behavioural expression. So often people don't realise that the person has frontal lobe disorder because their behaviours are misinterpreted as the person changing or whatever reason it is, having a midlife crisis or just, I don't know what labels we put on a person, but people don't understand that this is a type of dementia and it often gets missed for a long time. It often gets misdiagnosed. People don't get diagnosed with frontal lobe dementia. And one of the reasons is because memory isn't an issue for people until a long time down the road. People don't recognise it as a dementia. Similarly, Lewy body dementia is caused by a different type of protein building up inside the brain cells. Now, often Lewy bodies start off in the back of the brain, which is the bit cerebellum and the bit that's to do with movement coordination. So Lewy bodies might be responsible for Parkinson's disease, but if they start in a different bit of the brain, then the person may have Lewy body dementia. And the distinguishing features for Lewy body dementia is that people might have visual misperceptions, they might have hallucinations, they might have nightmares or night terrors, they might have real difficulty settling at night, but they may also become a little bit irrational. So you try and explain something to them and they just don't get it because they lose that ability to rationalise things. So again, sometimes Lewy body dementia may be mistaken for frontal lobe dementia because sometimes there are similar overlap in some of the behaviours. But again, with Lewy body dementia, memory isn't an issue to a very long time in disease progression. So that's just a very quick overview. In a next podcast, I will start going into those different conditions in a lot more detail so you understand what's really going on in the brain for them. But the key thing to remember, it's not about memory. It might be in some cases, but in a lot of cases, it's not. It's far more complicated than that, and we really need to start understanding and educating ourselves rather than assuming people are going to have memory issues when a lot of people don't. So, and the third thing that I want to challenge misconceptions on is you'll often hear people saying that you're losing the person, that the person is dying over and over again, or a person with advanced dementia isn't there anymore and you've lost them. Well, that isn't the case. That absolutely isn't the case. And we have to stop that dehumanizing view about neurocognitive disorders. I'm going to explain that by explaining to you a bit about the difference between the cognitive brain and the emotional brain. So we have several layers to the brain. And as humans, we have evolved to have a top layer called the cerebral cortex, which is far more involved, far more complicated than some of the lower levels. So the lowest level of the brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain, that's the bit that really just keeps us alive. So we've got our everything that our brainstem and the bits that control our heart rate and our breathing and our digestion, and just the stuff that basically keeps our bodies alive, and we have no conscious control over that. We also then have the area called the fight, flight or fright area, and that is the bit that is our basic survival mechanism. So it's called a reptilian brain. If you imagine a lizard is a cold-blooded animal. If you imagine a lizard in the desert, sitting on his rock, because he was a bit cold. He was feeling a bit cold, so he can't warm himself up, so he has to go and sit in the sun to warm himself up. So he's sitting there, and he's basically got his basic functions. So he'll pee when he needs to pee. He will, if he gets hungry, he'll catch something to eat. If he gets thirsty, he might find something to drink or eat a leaf that's got some water in it. If you imagine that lizard sitting on that rock, all of his senses, he's just the whole time on high alert, waiting. And as soon as something in the environment changes that suggests he might be under threat, he runs away. So that's a basic fight or flight. And it's our threat response. It's triggered by chemicals. So something in that bottom, the amygdala is kind of where we talk about emotional memory. So that learns from experience. So it will learn what's a threat and what isn't. And as soon as something seems to be a threat, some chemicals will be spurted into the bloodstream that causes the body to respond. Now, sometimes, based on our learnt experience, sometimes those chemicals will spurt into the body and they'll prepare us to fight. This is not really talking about the lizard anymore. This is how we've evolved. So sometimes a certain set of chemicals will be spurted into the body and the brain and we're ready to fight. Other times, different sets of chemicals will be spurted into the bloodstream and the brain and the body, and they will make us run away. And other times, a different set of chemicals will be spurted into the bloodstream and the brain and the body, makes us freeze. Because if we play dead, we're less likely to get attacked. So fight, flight, or freeze. Those different chemicals that are spurted into the body at different times are what we call emotions. They're the body's emotional response. So emotions are just different sets of chemicals that are spurted into the bloodstream and go to the brain and the body for us to respond in those survival situations. Now, as humans and as mammals, as we evolved, animals worked out that they were safer living in groups rather than as individuals. Safety in numbers. The difficulty with that is if we've got this fight or flight that triggers every time somebody comes near or another animal comes near, how on earth do we survive in those groups? So we've also developed a different system called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that kind of spurts a different set of emotions or chemicals into our bodies, so that when, and this is through learnt experience, when somebody comes within our space and they appear to us to be safe and somebody we can spend time with, then parasympathetic nervous system will spurt some chemicals into the body to say, actually, it's okay. You can calm down. You can let this person in because they're safe. This is a safe situation, not a fight or fright situation. So as humans, we have sets of different chemicals, different emotions that get sent out based on our amygdala's ability to decide if this is a safe situation or an unsafe situation. Is this a person that I can let near, or isn't it? Because if we didn't have that, we would never be able to develop relationships, and we would never be able to reproduce. So that's why we've got the two systems there. But there's basically a very few number of emotions, because they're just different chemicals that are spurted into our body. And actually, as those chemicals, it is so fast that those emotions only last between 3 to 6 seconds. They're the physical response to a situation we find themselves in. Feelings are something completely different. Feelings are something that our cognitive brains have learnt to label, and that we are socially taught to label different emotions. So if I see somebody behaving in a way that their fight or flight has been, I might say, put a label on them as anger or aggressive. And when I feel that myself, I will put that label on there. When I see somebody who is obviously very safe with somebody else, I might put a label on that as love. If I'm made to feel really, really safe with somebody, I might say that's love. I might say it's well-being. So feelings are just our subjective labels that we are taught to put onto other people and ourselves when those chemical emotions are spurted into our bodies. So emotions don't last very long. Feelings last longer if we have been taught to give those feelings some sort of significance, whether positively or negatively. So it's all about fight or flight. It's all about that's our emotional memory. That's what it is. It's about self-preservation. Our cognitive brain is a lot more complicated than that. Our cognitive brain works everything out. It's a bit of our brain where we think things through. It's the highest bit of that has been adapted in humans. So, and it's all about being able to live and survive in complex social groups. So we've developed language as a way of communicating. We've developed a concept called time. Now, time doesn't actually exist. Time is a concept that as humans we have developed to try and organise ourselves. So long before the Industrial Revolution, people didn't really work in time. They didn't need clocks. They didn't need watches. They got up when it was light, went out to work, stopped to have something to eat when they were tired, carried on work until it went dark. And when it went dark, they'd come in and they'd get ready for settling down to sleep. And there's a natural body clock that is controlled mainly by a chemical called melatonin. We only really invented time when, during the Industrial Revolution, we needed people to be in a certain place. Before that, the reason why old churches have got clocks and bells is that because most people didn't work in time, the bells rang when people were expected to go to church for church service. Time only really became important when, in the Industrial Revolution, we needed a whole group of people in the same place at the same time to come to this factory to work. Or, for example, the train system was very responsible for us getting more obsessed about time, because obviously if you're going to put a train on to take people from one place to another, people needed to be in the same place at the same time to get on that train. So time is just a concept, and it's really important that we understand that, because so often when people have got advanced dementia, we can upset them by trying to get them to stick to our routines and our timescales when actually they don't really work in time anymore. That isn't important. So time is another cognitive concept with language. Now, in our cognitive brain, we've also got an area called the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is what we might call our physical memory or our cognitive memory. And what that does is when we get memories come up from our emotional memory, they will come up into our conscious awareness, and our cognitive memory will then put a date and a time and a context into that memory. So I might suddenly get a memory, a bit of music might provoke some emotions, provoke that emotion in me, and my cognitive brain will say, oh yes, that was 1975 when you were with your grandma having a lovely time at the beach. So it puts that emotional response into a context. When my cognitive brain is damaged, I will still have the emotions, I will still have that memory associated, I will know how I feel, but I won't have that cognitive brain that's able to put it into a context. So, for example, I might see you and I have no idea who you are, but I know how you make me feel. So it might be that you're my daughter coming to visit me when I'm in a care home, and I might see you and smile. I will have no idea. I won't be able to say who you are, but I know straight away my emotional memory will want to give you a cuddle and want to be close to you and get joy out of being in your presence. Where people talk about our memory people losing their memory, it's only the cognitive memory that gets affected in dementia. That emotional memory stays intact all the time. But that might mean I suddenly start reliving a memory. Something has triggered, a piece of music has triggered a whole load of emotion from 1966. And I haven't got my cognitive brain that's able to say to me, oh, that's from then. It's not now, it's from then. So I'll be reliving that memory as if it's happening now. And it's fascinating because something very similar happens when people are having flashbacks if they've got trauma. They relive the emotion, but somehow their cognitive brain isn't able to put that emotion into context and say, that isn't happening now, that was happening 20 years ago. So we really need to understand that people do not lose their emotional memory. So you're not losing the person. The person is still there. Just because they can't connect to us in language anymore when they've got really advanced dementia, why should that be a problem? It's only a problem if we are living in this world that relies on cognitive understanding. Because actually only 93% of our communication is all through body language. How do animals communicate with each other? How do you know what your dog's feeling? How does your dog know what you're feeling or saying? It's not because of language. So only 93% of our communication is not with language. About 4% of communication is the words that we use. And a little bit more is to do with your actual tone of voice and the way you're communicating that language. The rest is all to do with body language. So don't say the person can't communicate anymore. Of course they can communicate, and of course they will feel what you're feeling. What I mean by that is you need to be really careful what energy you're giving off. Because if you approach a person with dementia who is no longer able to use their cognitive brain to make sense of the world, if you're approaching them all tense and there's got to do this, blah, 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 they will pick up on your negative energy. So one of the things you need to do when you're approaching somebody with advanced dementia who can't communicate in words anymore, what you need to do is just, as you come up to them, make sure that you're communicating outside of time. Forget time, just be in the moment. Forget all the things you think you need to do to or for or with them and all the tasks you've got to do. And just you need to breathe, let go of all your negative energy. Make sure you're approaching them, giving off all the vibes and all of the non-verbal communication that you are safe, that you're somebody that they don't have to fight or flight or run away from. Just come up to them calmly and hold their hand, touch them, give them an object that's very recognisable to them, and just connect heart to heart. Often we can do that through music. Music is so powerful, and music is in our emotional memory. You'll know that because you'll hear a piece of music from the 1960s or 1970s or 1980s, and it'll take you straight back to a moment in time, and you're back there reliving it with all the emotions. That's because music's a part of our emotional memory. So music is very, very powerful. Other things that people respond to in their emotional memory, absolutely, if they were an animal lover, they will respond to seeing animals. If they are a mother or a parent, they often respond to seeing young children. We had a lady on one of my communities where you really found it very hard to understand anything that she said. She still used words, but they came out in the wrong order. So it was very difficult sometimes to understand what she was saying. But when she saw young children, sort of toddlers, if they came in, she would just talk to them and everything she said would come out in the right order. And it was always very loving and just beautiful to watch. So what are we saying here then? You're not losing the person. The person is not losing their mind. But equally, you are not losing the person. They are not dying. They are still in there. It's just we have to find more and more ways to communicate heart to heart rather than head to head. And I have got a story to tell you about this, a very personal story. My mum had dementia for over 12 years. And in the last 2.5 years, she completely lost her ability to speak. I think she had a TIA or mini stroke and just suddenly stopped speaking. So from that moment onwards, I was visiting her 3 times a week and trying to stay at least an hour with her, but really struggling to connect and really finding it very difficult. And at first, for the first year, I took my sausage dogs with me. She had sausage dogs for 30 years. So if I walked in without the dogs, there'd be no recognition at all. But the minute she saw the sausage dogs, her face would light up and she would become animated and she'd love having the dogs on her lap and she'd be stroking them. I think you're lovely. It's the only time she ever spoke was when she had Buddy on her lap and was stroking him. But after about a year, she stopped responding to the dogs. She was finding them annoying rather than them helping. So I stopped taking the dogs with me. So I had a 1.5 years of really struggling to connect. Now, at the time, I learned how to deliver namaste care. I became a namaste care practitioner. So I was able to do lovely hand massages and head massages. And I think she appreciated that. But still didn't feel I particularly connected when I was doing those things for her. We did always connect if I took some little chocolates with me. So me and her have got this joint love of chocolate. And as soon as she could seem completely disengaged. As soon as she heard that chocolate wrapper, she'd be alert and awake and we'd enjoy a naughty chocolate with each other. Say naughty, I think that's, it's part of that emotion, isn't it, about doing something we shouldn't be doing together. But we always bonded over a little chocolate. But one day I walked in about a month before she died and I knew something had changed. And I knew somehow there was no logical reason for feeling that way, but I just got this sense that she didn't have much time left. And for some reason, I just had this urge to open up my phone. And I think it was for me, I needed some comfort. And I knew that what she always found it very comforting was a certain bit from the Bible, because her life revolved around the church. My dad was a church leader, and her favourite bit of the Bible was Psalm 23, which is Psalm they often read at Christian funerals. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So I found it on my phone, and I started reading it to her. And when I finished, I looked up, and for the first time in years, she was completely alert, and she was looking at me right from her very soul, right into the depths of my soul. She had tears streaming down her face, and she just looked at me and she just went. And I absolutely know she was still there. No one will ever tell me that dementia causes people to die over and over again, or it's the long death, or any of those things. You will never convince me, because I know my mum was still there. And in that moment, I had used something that connected deep in her heart, and we had that moment of heart-to-heart connection. I wish I knew then what I know now about how to connect with people in that way. And it is all about being in the moment, getting out of your head, and finding shared moments of joy, whether that's through music, whether that's through being outside, going for a walk and hearing the birds singing, or taking great joy out of something out of nature, whether it's through dogs and cats and animals, whether it's through children. Everybody is going to have a different way of connecting. But it's really, really important that we do continue to connect with people in that way. Please do not just think, well, they've gone. They're not there anymore. They are still there. And the danger of thinking that way is that we're going to start being dehumanising and just treating them like a body, rather than treating them as the beautiful, beautiful individuals that they still are. So, we need to change our minds about people whose minds have changed. We need to find a different word from dementia. We need to understand that these are neurocognitive disorders, and there's hundreds of them. So we actually need to be describing disorders, and we need to find another collective term, if we are going to use a collective term, that is not derived in negative labels that are to do with people being out of their mind. We've got to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing we need to change our mind about, it's not all about memory. For some people it is, but for a lot of people it isn't until very later on in the disease. We have to find what condition the person has. We have to understand what their symptoms are. And most of all, we need a person-centred approach. And we need a day-to-day approach, because people with the same condition are going to have a completely different journey. But what somebody experiences one day, they might be experiencing something completely different the next. So we need to listen, we need to communicate, we need to find out what support they need today, and make absolutely no assumptions that what they needed yesterday might be what they need today. So it's person-centred care. It's care that's in the moment, and just make no assumptions. Don't think you know anything about this person, because today their needs might be completely different from yesterday. What we need to do is understand the changes that are going on in the brain, and rather than trying to put the person under pressure to carry on living in a cognitive world, if that cognition is becoming very difficult for them, if language is becoming difficult for them, if time is becoming difficult for them, we need to adjust what we're doing and the way we're communicating, not expect the person to carry on living the way they did before, when their brain is changing on a daily basis. We need to totally stand up against this idea. you're losing the person. The person is saying a long goodbye, and every day you're losing a different part of them. You're not. They're still there. It's just their brain's working differently, and we need to adjust to those changes in the brain. And we also need to change our mind about thinking that people can't communicate just because they can't communicate in words. I've given that example of my mum. 12 years after her dementia journey began, a month before she died, and we connected on a deep, deep level and communicated with each other on a level that was just far beyond words. It was a spirit-to-spirit connection. So we need to learn to communicate heart to heart rather than head to head. So, hope that's been helpful. That is 4 ways that we need to change our mind about people whose minds have changed. And I hope you look forward to the next podcast when I'll be going into more detail about some of the different neurocognitive conditions. See you next time.